She warned, "If you drink this, you'll never be human again." He drank without fear. Part 1. The Thing About Broken Things. The colony ship Ardent had been drifting for 11 days when Marin first noticed the man in Bay 17. She noticed him the way she noticed everything: cataloging, filing, assigning probability weight to each detail. He was human, obviously. That much required no expertise. She had studied humans for 6 of her 9 years aboard the Ardent, and she had grown fluent in the particular grammar of their bodies. The forward lean that meant curiosity, the shoulder drop that meant grief, the way their eyes moved when they were calculating versus when they were remembering. This man's eyes were doing something she did not have a clean word for. He was sitting on an overturned cargo crate, elbows on his knees, looking at nothing. His hands were folded together in a way that suggested he had meant to pray and then forgotten how. Marin was not supposed to be in Bay 17. She was a xenobiologist attached to the Ardent Science Division, and her clearance extended to Bays 1 through 9 and the entire ring of observation decks. Bay 17 was cargo and maintenance. But 11 days of drift had made shipboard administration somewhat flexible on the question of where people were supposed to be. And Marin had found, in her 9 years among humans, that no one questioned a woman walking purposefully with a data tablet in her hands. She slowed, she should not slow. She had a culture sample warming in Lab 3, and a report due to the division chief before the next duty rotation. She slowed anyway. "You are in distress," she said. The man looked up. He was perhaps 35 by human estimation. She had grown better at this than she'd expected. Dark hair, badly in need of cutting. A face that had spent considerable time outdoors before whatever sequence of events had landed him on an interstellar colony vessel. He had a quality she had noticed in certain humans who had lost something significant. He took up less space than his actual size suggested. He blinked at her. "I'm fine." "That is not accurate," Marin said. "Your respiratory rate is elevated. You have not blinked in approximately 40 seconds, which in humans typically indicates sustained stress response. And you are sitting in an empty cargo bay at 0300 ship time, which is not consistent with being fine." The man stared at her for a moment. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the shape a smile makes when the person making it has forgotten the purpose of smiling. "Fair enough," he said. "Who are you?" "Marin, I am a xenobiologist with the Science Division." She paused. "Who are you?" "Callum Hart. He glanced around the bay as if reminding himself. "Civilian Technical Advisor, Agricultural Systems." Which is a very useful thing to be on a ship that is currently drifting because of an engine failure that has nothing to do with agriculture. Marin considered this. She walked to a crate adjacent to his and sat down. She did not analyze why she did this. She simply did it, and then found herself sitting across from him in the blue-gray half-light of Bay 17. "Drifting is uncomfortable for humans," she said. "Is it comfortable for your species?" She thought about this honestly. "No, we have a word vitheru, which means approximately the wrongness of stillness when one should be moving. There is no comfortable form of being lost." Callum Hart looked at her for the first time in a way that felt like actually looking. "What species are you?" Marin tilted her head. "You cannot tell." He studied her. She knew what he was seeing. She had studied it herself in reflective surfaces, in the way other humans' eyes moved when they first encountered her. She was not dramatically alien. That was perhaps the most disorienting thing about her, for humans. She was close enough to human that the differences registered as wrongness before they resolved into specificity. The iridescence at the edges of her irises, shifting between gold and a deep amber that had no human analog. The faint bioluminescent tracery along her collarbones, visible only in low light right now, in Bay 17's blue-gray dimness, it would be just barely perceptible. The way her fingers were slightly too long, the joints slightly too elegant, like someone had taken the human blueprint and refined it without changing the basic schematic. "You look almost human," he said finally. "Almost," she agreed. "The Vethali evolved on a world with similar atmospheric composition and comparable gravity to Earth. We share approximately 63% of baseline human genetic architecture. Convergent evolution produces convergences." She paused. "We also find humans almost Vethali. It is a very strange symmetry." Callum Hart was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been away from home?" The question surprised her, not its content. She was often asked factual questions about her species, her origin, her biology. This was different. "How long have you been away?" As if it might matter. As if the duration of a particular kind of loneliness was worth asking about. 11 years, she said. 2 years of transit to reach human space. 9 years aboard the Ardent. "Do you miss it?" "Yes." She said it without hesitation, which surprised her. She had spent considerable effort over 11 years learning to package that particular truth in more palatable framings. "My work is fulfilling. The humans I have met are remarkable. I find Earth's biome endlessly compelling. All true, none of them the truth. Very much," she added, because he had asked honestly, and he seemed like someone who would know the difference. "I haven't been home in 4 years, he said. "I've been on 3 different colony assignments." "But that's different. I could go back, theoretically. The option exists." "The option existing is not the same as being able to take it." He looked at her again, that quality of actually looking. "No," he said, "it's not." They sat in Bay 17 for another hour. She did not go back to Lab 3. The culture sample would be fine. Part 2. What grows in unlikely places. The Ardent's engines were repaired on the 14th day of drift. By then, Marin had a habit. She told herself it was research, xenosociological, the kind of informal observation that supplemented her formal work. She had a file on her tablet labeled Cultural Adaptation Studies, human behavioral patterns that she had maintained since her 2nd year aboard. And she added notes to it, sometimes in the same way humans kept journals. Not for any particular professional purpose, but because the act of writing things down made them feel more real. She did not add notes about Callum Hart to the file. She was not sure why. He had a routine, she discovered, that began before first light on every shipboard morning. He rose at 0500, which she knew because Bay 17 had become a place she passed through during her own early rotations, and he was always already there, tending to the hydroponic test beds he had set up in the corner with whatever equipment the agricultural division could spare. The colony mission had allocated him a small research mandate alongside his advisory role, testing soil medium adaptations for the eventual terraforming phase, figuring out what would grow in conditions that were almost but not quite Earth normal. She watched him work. He worked the way people worked when they had been doing something long enough that it had become a form of thought. His hands moved without consultation, adjusting pH levels and humidity metrics, checking root systems with a care that seemed disproportionate to the scale of what he was growing. Small things, seedlings of crops that would eventually, if everything went according to plan, feed a colony of 40,000 people. "You treat them as if they are patients," she said one morning, approximately 9 days after the drift ended. Callum looked up. He had long since stopped being startled by her presence. She had not fully processed what this meant, that she had become a predictable feature of his mornings. "They kind of are," he said. "They're stressed. Novel conditions, uncertain light cycles, wrong mineral composition in the growth medium. They're doing their best." That is a very empathetic framing for a plant. Plants have a lot to teach you about persistence. He checked a moisture sensor, made a note. They don't have the option to quit. They just keep trying to find the light. Marin thought about this. She sat on her usual crate. She had a usual crate now, which was another thing she declined to fully examine, and opened her tablet. She had genuine work to do. She also did not do it. "How did you end up on the Ardent?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, his hands still moving. "Divorce," he said finally. "The kind that takes everything you thought your life was going to be and puts it somewhere you can't reach anymore. I had a farm in Oregon, and then I didn't. And the colonial agriculture program was hiring, and I thought," he paused, "I thought it was better to go somewhere entirely new than to stay somewhere that used to be something else." Marin understood this precisely. "When I was offered the position on the Ardent," she said, "my mother told me that leaving is the bravest thing and the most frightening thing, and that I would not know which one it was until I had already gone." Was she right? Both, simultaneously. She looked at the seedlings. "What you said about them finding the light. My mother says something similar about grief. She says it is like a plant. It grows toward whatever you give it attention, so you have to be careful what you illuminate." Callum looked at her then, and she saw something in his face shift, not dramatically, not obviously, but in the way the light in Bay 17 shifted when the ship's rotation brought them around toward the star. Gradually, and then everything was different. "You're surprisingly easy to talk to," he said. "You are also," she said, and then realized she had said it and looked back at her tablet. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. "Marin," he said. "Yes. Thank you for," he gestured vaguely. "The bay, the sitting here, I know you have actual work." "I do have actual work," she agreed, "and yet." "And yet," he said, and this time the shape his mouth made was closer to a real smile. Part 3: The Compound. In her 6th week aboard the Ardent, from the start of her renewed awareness of its rhythms. She had been aboard for 9 years, but there are ways of not truly inhabiting a place until something makes you notice it. Marin made a mistake. It was a small mistake professionally. It was a larger mistake in a different category of reckoning that she was not yet prepared to name. She was refining a compound she had been developing for 3 years, a biological mediator derived from Vethali's cellular architecture that she believed could assist in the early phase terraforming of mineral-deficient soils. The compound worked by mimicking certain Vethali endocrine signals. Her own species biology was partly what made the research possible, since she could test interaction effects on herself without the ethical complications of animal testing. This was standard practice in Vethali xenobiology. Their cellular architecture was robust, adaptable. They had evolved on a world with dramatic seasonal extremes, and their bodies were, by nature, somewhat negotiable about what they considered optimal conditions. She had been refining the delivery mechanism. She was distracted. She had been distracted, she understood in retrospect, for approximately 6 weeks, because there was a man in Bay 17 whose laugh she had begun to think about in idle moments. The refined compound, when she tested it on herself, produced unexpected results. Not dangerous ones, her vital signs remained stable, her cognition unimpaired. But the bioluminescent tracery along her collarbones and arms brightened dramatically, and her body temperature elevated by approximately 1.2 degrees, and she became, abruptly, extremely aware of the ambient sounds of the ship. The hum of life support, the distant thrum of engines, and more acutely than she could explain, the sound of someone moving in the corridor outside her lab. The door opened. Callum Hart said, "Hey, the division chief said you had preliminary data on the soil mediator." "Oh." He stopped. She understood, glowing, faintly but noticeably. Her arms were lit from within, the golden tracery brightened to something visible even in the full light of the lab. She could feel the warmth of it. She knew what it looked like. "Oh," he said again differently. "I made an error in my dosing calculation," she said, with as much professional composure as she could assemble. "The compound interacts with my biology in a manner I had not fully anticipated. I am not in danger. I will return to baseline in approximately 40 minutes. He stepped into the lab. The door slid shut behind him. He was looking at her with an expression she had catalogued but never been the subject of before, careful and soft, and very much not the way people looked when they were startled by something wrong. "You're lit up," he said. "Yes." "You're Marin, that's—" He seemed to lack a word. Is it all right if I—" He gestured helplessly in her general direction. She extended her arm. He reached out and held his hand just above her wrist, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The golden light of her tracery caught the edges of his fingers. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Warm," she said, "and heightened. I'm aware of things I usually filter." She paused. She was, at the moment, aware of his heartbeat. Not auditorily, her hearing was not that acute, but through whatever the compound was doing to her sensory architecture. She could perceive the electromagnetic signature of his cardiac rhythm, faintly, the way you might perceive warmth from a fire across a room. "I am aware of your heartbeat," she said, because lying by omission felt wrong, and she had always been, as her mother said, constitutionally incapable of being less than honest about the things that mattered. Callum was very still. "Is that—" "It is not alarming. It is—" She searched for the right word. "Intimate in a way I had not expected." He lowered his hand, but he did not step back. He stayed close, closer than the professional distance they had maintained in Bay 17, closer than the careful geometry of two people who had told themselves they were simply becoming friends. He stayed close and looked at her glowing arms and then at her face. "Marin," he said. "Yes. I think I've been coming to Bay 17 every morning for reasons that have less to do with the plants than I've been telling myself." She let out a slow breath. "I have been conducting what I labeled as xenosociological research," she said. "My data set consists almost entirely of notes about one human subject." His mouth curved. "How's the research going?" "I have reached conclusions that fall outside the scope of my original study parameters." "Yeah," he said softly, "me too." Neither of them said anything for a moment. The lab hummed. Her arms glowed, warm and golden, and his hand drifted back toward hers, this time landing gently in actual contact. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, and she felt, through the heightened awareness of the compound, every point of that contact. The warmth, the steadiness, the particular pressure of someone who was trying to be careful. "This is going to be complicated," he said. "Most things worth doing are," she said. "I have observed this consistently in humans." "What about in Vithali?" "Also consistently," she admitted. "We are perhaps more systematic in our approach to complication, but we are not immune to it." He laughed, the laugh she had been thinking about in idle moments, she noted. She filed this data point. She did not pretend she was filing it for professional reasons. Part 4, the warning. She told him 6 weeks later. She had been working up to it without quite knowing that was what she was doing, the same way the compound had been developing for 3 years, and only at a certain point revealed what it was actually capable of. There were things about her biology that she had not explained because they had not been relevant, and then they became relevant, and she discovered that she had been afraid to say them in a way she had not acknowledged. They were in Bay 17. They were always in Bay 17, eventually. He was checking the growth rates on a strain of wheat he'd modified for the colony's anticipated soil conditions, and she was at her usual crate but not doing any work, because she had a thing to say, and it was taking up too much space in her head for anything else to fit. "Callum," she said, "I need to explain something about Vithali biology." He looked up. He had a gift for reading the quality of silences. She had noted this from early on, and the quality of this one had apparently told him something, because he set down his instruments and turned to face her properly. "Okay," he said. "The compound I am developing," she said, "the soil mediator. I have explained that it mimics Vithali endocrine signals." "Right. What I have not explained is the broader biochemical context. She had rehearsed this. The rehearsed version felt thin now that she was saying it. Vethali, our bond chemistry is not like human pair bonding. It is not metaphorical. It is physiological. When a Vethali forms a significant attachment to another person, a deep, chosen bond, the kind we designate with the word Veth, there is a biological process. We produce a compound called Vethari. She paused. It is related to the compound I have been developing. They share a precursor molecule. I discovered this 3 years ago, which is part of why my research took the direction it did. Callum was watching her carefully. What does Vethari do? In Vethali, it deepens and solidifies the bond chemistry. It changes how we perceive the bonded person, makes their presence necessary in a way that is not addiction, not exactly, but adjacent to it. It is what separates a Veth from a preference. She looked at her hands. The compound I have been developing has a variant form, a side product of the synthesis process. She stopped. When I am with you, my body produces Vethari. I have been synthesizing a variant that is partially cross-compatible with human biochemistry. He was very still. What does that mean, cross-compatible? It means that if a human were exposed to sufficient quantities through, for example, prolonged physical proximity or through direct contact, she looked up at him. It would change them, not dramatically, not in ways that would be visible, but the bond chemistry would shift. They would experience something like what I experience. The necessity. The sense that the other person is essential in a way that can't be undone. The silence was very loud. Marin, Callum said slowly. Are you saying that spending time with you might have been? No, not accidentally. The quantities I produce are not sufficient. Ambient exposure over months would produce only a mild effect, something easily within the range of normal human pair bonding neurology, indistinguishable from falling in love in the ordinary human sense. She folded her hands. But I have, in the course of my research, produced a concentrated form, a synthesized Vethari variant. It exists in my lab. And it is effective. A single dose would produce a full bond chemistry shift in a human, permanent, not reversible. She met his eyes. I want to be very clear about what I am telling you. I am telling you that this exists. I am not telling you this because I intend to give it to you. I am telling you because, she took a breath, because you deserve to know that there is a version of this that I could make permanent and irreversible without your knowledge, and I would never do that, and I need you to know that I know that. He was quiet for a long time. That's what you're warning me about, he said. Yes. You're warning me that you could do something, and that you won't. I'm warning you that the something exists, that the capability is real, so that your choice to, she gestured between them, imprecisely, at the thing they had not yet named but had been building steadily since a drifting ship and a man sitting in a cargo bay. So that your choice is informed. So that it is a choice. Callum stood up from his crate and crossed the 3 feet between them and sat down next to her. Not across from her, next to her, so that their shoulders were almost touching in the blue-gray light of Bay 17. I know what I'm choosing, he said. You should hear the rest first. There's more. There's always more. She kept her eyes on the middle distance. The compound is real. I have not administered it to you. I would not. But I also, she pressed her palms together. I am already bonded. Vethali do not form Veth lightly, but once formed, the chemistry is already complete on my end. It has been for some time. The sound of the ship, the quiet growing of things in the corner, his shoulder almost touching hers. How long, he asked. She considered lying. It was brief. Since the drift, she said. I identified the preliminary markers in myself approximately 2 weeks after that first morning in this bay. I have been managing it, trying to ensure that whatever you feel is your own. And what if what I feel is my own, he said. What if I've been coming here every morning at 0500 because I want to, not because of chemistry? then it is very important to me that you know you are choosing a person who will, for the rest of her life, experience you as necessary. Not as wanted. Necessary. The distinction matters. It does not mean I am without choice. It does not make me incapable of reason or independence. But you should know what you're choosing. He was quiet. She waited. Do you want to know what I think about when I'm not here? He said. She was very careful not to move. Yes. I think about what you're going to say when I show you something. I think about your face when you're working on something and you've just figured out a part of it. You get this. He made a gesture toward her. This kind of stillness, like everything else stops. I think about the way you explain things like they're worth explaining, like the person listening is worth explaining them to. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. I'm not afraid of permanent, he said. I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life. Permanent stopped sounding like a threat sometime around the middle of the drift. Callum, I know what you're saying. I know there's a compound in your lab that would change me permanently, and that you're telling me about it so I don't have to wonder if I've been changed without knowing it. And I am, he exhaled. I am grateful for that, more than I know how to say. But I've been changed anyway, he said, slowly, by you, by this. He gestured at the bay, at the seedlings, at the space between them. Not the compound, just this. Marin looked at him for a long time. She realized, glowing slightly, not as dramatically as in the lab, not the compound's brightening, but the quiet luminescence that appeared in Vethali under strong emotion. She watched him notice it. That means something, she said. What's happening to my bioluminescence right now? What does it mean? It means I am very, she searched. Moved, she said finally. The word is inadequate, we have better ones, Vithavan. It means something like the particular overwhelm of being known. He reached out and took her hand. Simply, directly, with the same careful steadiness she had first felt in the lab. She felt the warmth of him, not through the compound's heightening, just through the ordinary sensitivity of her own nervous system, the way she had always felt things. I'd like to learn the better words, he said. Part 5. What he drank without fear. The thing happened 3 months later, and it happened because of her, and it happened because of him, and mostly it happened because of the morning. The Ardent had a research protocol for novel biological compounds. Any substance with potential impact on human physiology had to be reviewed by the medical division, tested against safety parameters, and if approved, could be offered to willing human subjects under controlled conditions. This was standard. Marin had submitted her soil mediator and its synthesis side products for review in her 8th year aboard, before she had understood what the Vethari variant was. The medical division had flagged it as low risk. The file had sat unactioned. She had been working, in the 3 months since Bay 17, on an entirely different question. Not whether the compound was safe, whether the change it produced was something that could be consented to. Whether consent was possible, really, when you couldn't fully understand what you were consenting to until you had already consented. She had written 4 drafts of a paper on the subject. She had also had approximately 47 conversations with Callum in which this was the not quite spoken of thing. On a Tuesday, at 0500, she came to Bay 17 with her tablet and a small vial. He was already there. He looked at her face and then at the vial. You're going to try to talk me out of it again, he said. I am going to give you the information, she said. That is what I do. You will do what you do with it. He smiled. Give me the information. She set the tablet on the crate beside her. She did not look at the vial, which was sitting between them on the floor. The compound produces a permanent alteration to human bond chemistry architecture. The nature of the alteration, you would experience me as necessary, not as preferred, not as love, though that would also be present, as she tried to find the human framework for it, as categorically essential. The way breathing is essential, not compulsive, you would still have full autonomy, full capacity for independent choice and emotion. but the absence of me would register to your nervous system as a form of deprivation, in a way that absence of other people would not. I know, he said, we've been over this. I want you to know it fully, not just as a concept. You would never be fully human again in this regard. The change does not reverse. If something happened to me, if I died or left or... I'm aware, he said, quieter now. Marin, I'm aware. You cannot unknow me, she said. Once you drink it, you would spend the rest of your life with a piece of your neurology oriented toward me, even if I am not there. I know. I need you to be sure. He looked at her for a long time. In 9 years aboard this ship, she had catalogued thousands of human expressions. She did not have a clean name for this one. It was older than sentiment and quieter than certainty. It was the look of a person who has measured all the distances and decided that the measuring is finished. I've been sure, he said, since you sat down on that crate. He picked up the vial. She did not stop him. She watched him turn it in his fingers, the small glass catching the light, the liquid inside the pale gold color of Vethali bioluminescence, the color of early morning on a world neither of them had ever seen. She watched him consider it. She watched him not hesitate. He drank it. It was a very small amount. It took perhaps 2 seconds. He set the empty vial down with a small click on the cargo crate, and he looked at her, and for a moment his eyes caught the light wrong, or maybe right, a brief flicker of gold at the edges of his iris, gone almost immediately, the way light goes when the cloud moves over. How do you feel? She asked. Her voice was carefully steady. The same, he said, and he tilted his head, different. There's something, he pressed 2 fingers to his sternum, thoughtful. It's like a sound I couldn't hear before that I now can. I don't know how to explain it. You don't have to explain it, she said. He was looking at her. She knew, in the specific way she knew all things through the Vethari bond, that he was processing something, not fear, not regret, something slower and larger, the same category of things she had felt when she first recognized in herself what was happening and had to reckon with it. I'm still me, he said, partly to himself and partly to her. You are entirely you, she said. That was never at risk. He reached across the space between them and tucked a strand of her hair back, a gesture he had started some months ago, and that she had never asked him to stop, because she had filed it under the category of things that were impossible to want to stop. His fingers skimmed her jaw. Tell me the word again, he said, the one that means what's happening to you right now. Her bioluminescence was present, soft and steady, the way it was when she was not managing it anymore. Vithavan, she said, the overwhelm of being known. Is there a word for choosing to be known? She thought about it. We have Veth, which is the bond itself, but what you're describing, the active choosing of it, she paused. We do not have a word for that. Vethali form Veth through proximity and chemistry. The idea of choosing it fully, consenting to it in the way you have. She looked at his face. I think that is something my language has not needed to articulate before. He considered this. Then we'll have to make one. We will have to make one, she agreed. The lights in Bay 17 had the particular quality they had at 0500, when the ship's rotation brought them around toward the colony's target star. Not the star they'd come from, but the one they were going to. The light came in at an angle that turned everything the color of early morning. The seedlings in the corner reached toward it, which they did every day without instruction, because that is what growing things do. Marin sat in the light beside him and felt, for the first time in 11 years, no particular need to be anywhere other than exactly here. Part 6, A Morning Light. The Ardent reached its destination after another 4 months. Marin stood at one of the observation deck windows when the planet first resolved itself from a bright point into a shape, the curve of an atmosphere, the blue-gray of an ocean that no human had ever touched, the brown-green of a continent that had never been named by anyone who could survive on its surface. Not yet. Callum stood next to her. Their shoulders were touching. There it is, he said. There it is, she agreed. She had a moment, the kind of moment she had noticed humans describe, where everything you expected to feel meets everything you actually feel, and they are not the same thing. She had expected relief. She had expected professional satisfaction. She had expected, perhaps, a particular kind of loneliness to ease, now that the long transit was over and the work was beginning. She had not expected to be primarily aware of the warmth of his arm against hers, and to find that this felt like the thing that mattered most. "What's the word?" he said. "Which word?" "The one you're looking for right now. I can tell you're looking for one." She was quiet, watching the planet turn slowly in the light of its star. "My mother has a word for moments like this, vithural. The particular way the world looks when you are about to begin something you will love." She paused. "But she always said it had a second meaning, a kind of double exposure. It also means the moment you understand that you have already begun." "Which meaning applies right now?" She turned from the window to look at him. He was watching her the way he had watched her since Bay 17, with the quality of actually looking, the kind of attention that does not catalog. He had been changed by her compound and was still entirely himself. She had warned him. He had chosen. She had spent 4 months since then learning what it was to be with someone who had made that choice clearly, and looking at him now she thought, this is what the word means, both meanings, simultaneously. The beginning, and the understanding that it already began. "Both," she said. He took her hand. Outside the window, the planet turned in its morning light, not any morning either of them had known, not the cool green mornings of Oregon she had heard him describe, not the crystal-bright mornings of her homeworld she had been missing for 11 years. A new morning, the first of many. The Ardent began its descent. Epilogue: the language they made. In the 4th year after landing, Marin completed her paper on Vethari cross-compatibility and the ethics of biological bond consent. It was, in the academic consensus that followed, considered a foundational document in xenorelational ethics. It won 2 prizes she had not anticipated. It was cited in the first interspecies partnership legal framework, ratified by the colonial government. In the acknowledgments she wrote, "The central argument of this paper, that true consent requires not only information, but trust in the person providing it, was first articulated to me not in any scholarly context, but by a man in a cargo bay at 0300 who told me that he was aware, and that he was sure, and who has been both of those things every day since." The word they invented in the 4th year was vithuval. It came from an argument they were having, which was not a rare occurrence, because she was systematic and he was intuitive, and they frequently found different right answers to the same question, and had learned over 4 years that this was not a problem to be solved. They had been arguing about the growth projections for the Eastern Basin, and she had made a point that required referencing something he'd said 8 months earlier, verbatim, and he had stopped and looked at her in a particular way. "You remember exactly what I said," he said, not quite a question. "I remember everything about you," she said, and then paused, because she had not intended to say it so plainly. "That is the Vethari bond. I retain information about you with higher fidelity than—" "No," he said. "I do too. Not the same way, maybe. Not the chemistry. But I remember exactly what you were wearing the first time you sat down in Bay 17. I remember what you said about your mother and grief and plants. I remember every word you've said to me that mattered." She was quiet. "Humans attribute this to love." "Maybe," he said, "but it's specific. It's you specifically, not people I love in general." She had thought about this for 3 days. On the 4th day she came to him with the word, vithuval, a compound of veth, the bond, and thuval, which was an old Vethali word with no good translation, meaning approximately the quality of something that has been chosen so fully that it becomes as natural as breathing. He had learned enough Vethali by that point to understand the roots. He looked at her face when she said it. "That's the choosing word," he said. "That's the choosing word," she agreed. "For the active form of Veth, for when the chemistry did not produce it but the person did." He had picked it up like a seed, and kept it, and used it, the way he used all the words she gave him, with a care that suggested he understood they were not metaphors. She had been away from home for 15 years. She had not stopped missing it. She had found, in the strange way of things, that the missing it no longer felt like only loss, that something had grown in the space beside it, something she did not have a name for at first, and then had named carefully, with the vocabulary of two species pressed together into something new. On their mornings, and they had, she had calculated once, had approximately 1,460 mornings together since Bay 17. He woke first, and made the tea she had learned to tolerate, and sat with it in the light coming through the eastern windows while she moved through the ritual of waking. She was slow to wake. He was not. She had told him once that this was a Vethali characteristic. Their sleep cycles ran longer than human ones, and the transition out of them was gradual, reluctant. "You come back slowly," he had said. "Is that difficult?" "No," he said. "I like watching you come back." She had filed this in the category of things she planned to keep indefinitely, with no professional justification required. On the 1532nd morning, she sat across the table from him in the light coming through the eastern windows, and looked at his face, the dark hair still badly in need of cutting, as it had been the first time she saw it, the face that had spent years outdoors and showed it, and thought about the word vithural, her mother's word, the double exposure of beginning and understanding that you have already begun. She thought about the word they had made, vithuval, and about a small vial of pale gold liquid, and a man who had not hesitated. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I am thinking," she said honestly, "that I have been trying for 15 years to find the right word for this, and I think the answer is that it is not a word I have. It is a word we are still making." He looked at her across the morning light. She watched his face do the thing it did when something landed somewhere important in him, the settling quality, like something has found where it was meant to go. "We've got time," he said. "We have considerable time," she agreed. Outside the window, the eastern basin was turning gold in the first light of a world that had never had a morning before them. The crops were growing. The colony was waking. The light was doing what light does, traveling an incomprehensible distance to land on one specific thing, briefly, as if to say, "Here. This one. Look." She looked. And